All right, Laird, I'm going to need your help on this one. Marvel Dice Masters Uncanny X-Men is a second set of Dice Masters, second Marvel set, and there's only 2 other sets, Yu-Gi-Oh!, which kind of seems like it fell flat.
You know,
I guess it's just a totally different fan base for that property.
Well, with AVX, I was able to get to a couple of the the organized play tournaments that were sponsored by WizKids to get the promo cards. I was able to go to 2 of them. I think there was 5 or 6 of them. And then UXM had the same thing. Uncanny X-Men had the same.
There was 6 for sure, because there was, I remember, 3 promo cards each for the Days of Future Past and the Apocalypse, right?
Yep, they're Age of Apocalypse. Yeah. So I was able to go to a couple for AVX. I wasn't able to make any of Uncannies. I'm probably going to buy some of them online. You can't get them in a booster. They were promos.
Yeah.
But Yu-Gi-Oh! Never seemed to really I know it did because I read a lot about this game online. I know it got into the meta and people were mixing the sets. I know a lot of people were really against mixing those sets. There's a very vocal member of the Facebook group that I post to about Dice Masters who was very adamant that he wasn't interested at all in this. A lot of people, I think, changed their mind once they saw some of the cards and how they could add to their teams and make cooler teams. But I was able to make one not a tournament. There wasn't quite enough entrants. Kind of the same thing that happened, I think, when you went.
Yeah.
But we were able to play a bunch of games, and nobody had any Yu-Gi-Oh cards. But my wife, I finally got her into Dice Masters by teaching her how to play, and she was like, well, I would like this, but I don't really like superheroes. So she went down and got a Yu-Gi starter, and I call it Yu-Gi.
So hip of you.
She got a starter and a few boosters, so that's kind of her part of it, but there are some very cool cards.
That's cool.
And I can beat up monsters with superheroes. I mean,
and like, I don't know anything about it. What I really mean by fell flat is, like, I perused yesterday some of the websites you told me about. Like, actually, D. Clark, a dude that works at the game shop here in town, writes for one of these Dice Masters websites.
Yeah,
really
Dyson
cool.
on.
I went to, I think, 3 or 4 different Dice Masters websites, even a couple that you hadn't mentioned that I found. There's a lot of Dice Masters websites.
They cropped up quickly. It was like a shanty town.
I didn't see one, like, cruising through the first 2 pages of each website, hitting older posts once. I didn't see one article about Yu-Gi-Oh! Dice Masters.
Yeah, well,
you know what I mean?
Part of
the
it,
community as a whole, it seems to have fallen a little flat.
Well, part of it is I think its target is a little young. They might not be posting as much online, but there's definitely a couple cards that have entered in the meta in a big way. The Ring of Magnetism and Lord of D are a very potent combo because Lord of D says this monster cannot be the target of global actions, right? And then Ring of Magnetism says whoever you put this on has to be the target of all global actions. So you put that Ring of Magnetism on Lord of D, and basically they can't use globals, which are a very big part of the game. They're a big part of the give and take. Like on your turn, you get to use a global first, and then you defer, and if your opponent wants to use one, he can, and then you go to the next step. So it's a big part of the back and forth, and this shut it down. So,
okay.
And there's a couple of other cards that do some really cool stuff. Dark Magician is a way you basically pay 2 life to draw an extra die whenever you normally would, and in combination with some of the other cards, you can pay a life and end up drawing a bunch of dice, like double or triple what you normally would. I feel like there's 1 or 2 other cards of note. We got our first 1-drop, a 1 purchase cost in Canopic Jar in Yu-Gi-Oh! But we're talking about...
I like that there's a card called Canopic Jar. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's actually Morphing Jar, and one of them subtitle is Canopic Jar, I think.
So is there a like Egyptian theme to Yu-Gi-Oh?
Yeah, there's
just like one of the characters, or
there's a bunch of them. The only factions in Yu-Gi-Oh! One is Egyptian gods.
Oh, okay.
And the other one is something else. But there's a lot of monsters that are fantasy monsters, but they're kind of Egyptian gear. Like there's a dragon that's 1,000-year dragon, but he's got like the Eye of Ra.
Okay.
So it's kind of an eclectic. You get your fantasy. There's like a goblin attack force, so they're goblins. Then you've also got little cutesy kind of ones. There's Kuribo and a couple of others that look more like Pokemon. And then you've got your big scary dragons too. So it was very interesting to me.
Just a mix of stuff.
Yeah, it was enlightening. I didn't know anything about Yu-Gi-Oh! And apparently it has a pretty big fan base, the trading card game.
Let's talk a little bit about just Dice Masters in general before we get to Uncanny.
Mm-hmm.
You said that there was errata released for Dice Masters. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, there's been an issue with WizKids from the beginning of when this game came out. There's been a lot of problems. There was the supply problem when the game initially came out. Then there was the trade port problems that have plagued us earlier this year. But they finally kind of picked up the baton and ran with it as far as the rules forum goes, the official WizKids rules forum. And they started answering a bunch of questions last month, and they finally did some errata. This Monday, I believe, they released their errata. And there was several Yu-Gi-Oh cards that were just clarified, but the really big one I feel like is there was this card called, it's a Spider-Man, it's called Wallcrawler, and he was very powerful. He was part of what a lot of people were thinking was going to be the big team at Nationals, that everybody was going to be playing some variant of this, and they call it the Spider Bomb because if you play it correctly and you have good luck and choose your dice well, you can basically win on turn 3 every time that you can get it, and if not turn 3, turn 4 or 5. So, I mean, it makes a very quick game, and what they did was essentially nerfed him a little, not too much, but I feel like it'll help balance the game a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, so they made him, rather than being able to hit for between 13 and 15, can only hit for 10.
Okay.
So it doesn't sound like too much, but if you only have 20 life, that last 5 could be really important.
Any other big changes?
No, not in that errata yet. They, of course, that Spider-Man errata has raised its own questions, and there's some that are pending on the rules forum. Earlier today, the rules forum was down, the official WizKids rules forum, so I don't know if some of those have been answered, but there's a few Yu-Gi-Oh cards that people were pretty sure what they meant, but the wording was a little ambiguous, and also they've, a bit like Magic, they're adding keywords. So rather than having a whole sentence on a card and having that same sentence across every card, they're just making a keyword. So like regeneration, D&D has a bunch of them.
They've added something in with D&D that's sort of like trample.
Overcrush.
Yeah, overcrush, where you deal damage and whatever's blocked, anything that goes over the amount that was blocked actually goes to the player. Yeah,
and there was that in AVX in Throne Car, but it wasn't worded very well, and it was kind of awkward. They should have just put overcrush and your characters get 2 of your characters get +1 attack, but they didn't have the keyword in place at the time. But yeah, it's very cool. That overcrush ability is going to be, I think, very important going into Nationals.
Well, let's talk about D&D a little bit. We both got a starter. You got some boosters. We're going back to get some more boosters.
Yes.
Too excited. I get too excited about this every time.
It's so much fun to open
boosters. I want to play this game. I didn't play Uncanny. I got kind of a little disenchanted with AVX, but just being a new theme. And, Marvel, I really like Marvel characters, but it's just not my favorite. But this is cool, and I really can't wait for DC. Have you seen the Constantine cards for DC? There's some cool powers.
There's a super rare that's probably going to be a game changer, I think. It's a pretty powerful.
I love the way you talk about Dice Masters. It's so, like, you really, really love
this game. I do love it, and I don't get to play as much as I'd like, but I play a lot in my mind, and, we've talked about it on the show before, coming up with, like, a campaign sort of a thing, and I've still been tossing that around. I need a few more cards there's specific cards I want to use to make that Phoenix Force campaign that I was talking about. But, I really like this game, and I wanted to get it on the ground floor and be solid on the rule set so that if there's ever a little bit of a break in like, oh, well, they're doing 2 Yu-Gi-Oh sets next, or Yu-Gi-Oh and a new property that I'm not so interested in, I'll still have such a grasp of the base game that anything added on won't be such a challenge. Like, I feel like Magic players who played early in Magic and then stopped playing, coming back to it, there is a big learning curve. Like, they've added so much and changed so much that it's hard for them to get back on board, and I didn't want that to happen with Dice Master, so I got in, and I follow it pretty closely. I read all the sites that are big, and I need to get with you and see if there's any of those that you've seen that were good. Dice-A-Non is a great one, but yeah, I really like Dice Masters.
So let's talk about D&D. I haven't opened this, but you saw more of the cards than I did, but just looking at this promo card right here, it seems like it's, and you know more about Yu-Gi-Oh! And Uncanny than I do, but looking at this promo card, it seems like it's much different. So this promo card is Minsk and Boo, which I believe are, if I remember, characters from Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, I think so. Forgotten Realms for sure, but I don't know.
But, I mean, while active, Minsk and Boo get an experience token, +1/+1, +1 attack, +1 defense at the end of their turn. So at the end of every turn. If Minsk and Boo go into the use pile, remove all the tokens, but once per turn, you can remove a token from them to force an opposing character to attack. So, I mean, that's like, seems it's definitely much different than AVX.
Yes.
There was nothing like this. I mean, this is a advanced ability.
Yeah. D&D is really cool in that that's one thing I like about Dice Masters is that you can go through, and I have pretty close to the full sets of AVX and UXM. I'm missing a few rares, but you can look at every version of a character and say, okay, what's their power? And you can say, okay, I get that. That makes sense for that character to be able to do that. Like Doc Ock has powers where he can grab people and they can't block, or he can do his same damage to several people because he's got these arms that either grab people or can attack. All of it makes thematic sense, and they have carried it on so well into D&D. They've added the experience that we were just talking about. Basically, every time one of your non-NPC characters, one of your dwarven clerics or your elf wizards kills a monster, they get a +1/+1, and they accrue until they die. And that's very thematic for D&D, getting experience. And there's a few other things. Swarm is one of the new keywords. Energy drain. And I love the basic actions and non-basic actions in this are going to be spells and equipment that you can actually attach to your character, equip like you would. There's magic. I've seen magic sword, magic helmet, but I'm sure there's going to be more. And you put that on there, and you're playing D&D,
Yeah.
It's really cool.
You're definitely playing a higher level game than what Dice Masters originally was.
Yeah, there's a lot of keywords. And
being able to put cards on cards and give them special abilities, I mean,
yeah,
it's getting really cool. I mean, it's almost like you're really playing those characters instead of it being what I kind of felt with AVX was almost more of an abstracted.
Yeah.
Their powers are really thematic, but it's really abstracted. Now I'm getting to equip and like these kind of keywords that are doing different things. Like I feel like it'll make me want to build up a team more, this works with this. And in DC, they've got the cool Justice League thing where it gets +1 or something if another Justice League member is present.
There's another thing too, retaliation. I don't know if there's any retaliation in D&D. I haven't looked too much at
retaliation,
it. But DC definitely has a ton of cards that have it.
And what is that exactly? It's like if they do something to another Justice League member,
you do a damage to them.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. D&D has experience. We talked about that. Regenerate is you get to re-roll them when they get knocked out, and if they come up as a character, they go back in. And
very cool.
Trolls have that. The common Terrask, he has that. There's some really cool thematic stuff, like the Elf Wizard. She makes spells much cheaper to buy, which makes sense because she's a wizard. I mean, I feel like they really figured out how to put this game into Dice Masters, make it Dice Masters, but yet make it D&D.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
So let's go ahead and talk about Uncanny.
Yeah.
We definitely want to get a review of Uncanny out. Like, I mean, Dice Masters is big. You love it. Yeah. And you played a ton of Uncanny.
Yeah.
So let's talk about it for a few minutes. I played one game of Uncanny with you.
Yeah.
So I really want you to talk about this. So just like all the other Dice Masters, and I just looked at this D&D box, it's also designed by Eric Lang and Mike Elliott. Mm-hmm. So talk to us about, I feel like anybody that's going to care about this review knows about Dice Masters. So talk a little bit about the mechanisms and just what you think overall about the Uncanny set.
Okay, well, I think the big thing that Uncanny did is basically one card. Well, two cards have the global.
Was it the Professor X card?
Yeah, he changed the game. So AVX came out, and people really liked it, but what happened was with the problems with the product and the supply, people were stuck playing AVX for a little longer than they wanted to, and they were kind of miffed with it because there's a lot of very powerful characters, but the way that the game was before, it was very difficult to get some of those more expensive characters fielded. So in UXM, they added a Professor X who has a global ability, and you pay a mask and you get to move 2 of your sidekick dice from your use pile to your prep area. And it doesn't sound like much, but you do it a couple times and you're rolling 10, 12 dice. And that lets you easily get out those far more expensive characters and or have a big reserve of energy to really use your globals. So it really opened the field. UXM, I think they did it intentionally. They said, hey, we got a lot of characters in AVX people aren't buying or using because they're too expensive or they can't get them out anyway. And they made it possible through that Professor X global. It's on the common version of it, and it's on the rare Professor X. They both have the same global. The uncommon doesn't. It's a heroic card, which is kind of a keyword.
Did you say there's a basic action that has it also?
No, there's not a basic action that has it.
I'm just hearing things then.
No, may be.
Talk to me about one thing I want to know about Uncanny and also Yu-Gi-Oh, I guess, and probably D&D is the rule book. So the AVX rulebook, the first Dice Masters game, was probably one of the 5 worst rulebooks I've ever read.
Yeah.
Maybe vying for number 1. I mean, it was awful.
Yeah.
Someone taught me how to play the game, so the rulebook made sense, but man, it was awful. I mean, finally in there, I found in like 5 different places where I figured out that a starter game is 4 cards, whatever. Then a normal game, at home game, is 6 cards, and then a tournament game is 8 cards.
Yeah.
But it was tough to find that. We couldn't figure out how many cards to play with at home.
Yeah. The rules in general for this game were rough because that AVX rulebook came out and there was no rules for what's called the transition zone. So basically, when you pay for a die or fielding cost or whatever on your turn, those dice aren't available to your used pile. So like, for example, if I paid 5 this turn to buy a die and then I had a mask left over, I couldn't pay that mask to move those 2 I just spent to the prep area with the Professor X. I'd have to wait till during your turn. So they made Professor X, and then without those transition rules, he was way too powerful. So they said, well, we meant to make this more clear, but when you pay for something, those dice you used to pay are out of play. So they updated it online, but those all the rule books were stuck on that same ship in that same container with all this product, so they weren't updated. So D&D is DC will be the DC online version PDF of the DC rulebook is the one to use.
Really?
But it's
how are just like casual fans supposed to know that?
And that's the real problem is these supply problems have really messed up and made it confusing. It was already relatively confusing.
They need to just like airship, which doesn't have to worry about port stuff. Just airship a stack of like pamphlet rule
leaflets,
books.
just distribute them over.
For all the game shops that they just give out for free. Like, you buy this, here's this rule book.
That sounds like a really good. They did a few things like with AVX to help with the product. They knew that they weren't getting the product out. They knew people wanted to play, so they made all the basic actions and they gave a way to use regular dice.
That was pretty cool.
So yeah, I mean, WizKids is, they're WizKids. People take them with a grain of salt who know them because they've had so many issues like this with hero clicks, things getting moded out and people not being happy or things not being tournament legal.
Yeah.
So a lot of the people who are experienced with other types of games like this, they know the drill. But for new players, I think it's really bad. And WizKids has gotten better. Like I said, they've started doing errata. They've started answering questions on the website. But they really got off on a couple of wrong left feet here with the game, but it's getting better. It's definitely 10 times more playable than AVX was by itself.
Yeah, that game could get really funky. Like, you would just come to a standstill because you just had no idea who was in the right. Like, how does this rule work? Like, if it works this way, I win. If it works the other way, they win.
Yeah.
And
there's still some stuff like that coming up, but it is getting better because they're answering questions. And not even if the question's unanswered, it's kind of better because they've answered similar questions, and so you can use their logic to extrapolate a little. You can see, this is probably how they meant it to work, and come to a consensus at least you can use until they officially answer it.
Yeah.
And
I really think, this game could, this is crazy to say, but, this could get as big as Magic someday,
I think definitely.
And I'm sure Magic the Gathering wasn't perfect when the first set ever came out.
I'm sure it's a lot of it's just that cutting your teeth, so to speak.
Growing pains for the game.
I mean, Couriers has been out for a while, but it's not at all the same. It is the same mechanic, but it's so different.
Yeah, but when you're just like, Eric Lang is just he's a board game designer.
Yeah.
And he did what's essentially a collectible card and dice game.
Yeah.
That's going to come with some growing pains.
Definitely.
There were some things that were just unmanageable in the first one. So I'm really excited about this one. New theme, cool new powers, equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's I like the.
Is there a bag of holding? I want a bag of holding where I can.
That's a good question.
Where if I play bag of holding and I get one of the dice out, just all of a sudden I can have I can roll extra dice or something, like it holds more.
There's some really cool in DC especially. There's a Zatanna that's kind of a rabbit out of the hat deal.
Zatanna, a guitar playing Zatanna.
Zatanna, that's what I meant to say. I'm not as big a DC fan.
Zatanna.
Let's see.
Carlos Santana.
But she has like a like she draws in the bag, and if it is what she said, then you get to roll it, or something.
I like how all of her subtitles on the cards are written backwards, just like her spells. How she has to say them.
That is really cool. I'm seeing, let's see, magic sword, magic helmet, a bunch of spells. I don't see a bag of holding, but I'm sure it will be. Then the next D&D set, I'm certain that there'll be a bag of holding. That's a classic. I mean, you can't.
So I guess their goal with these is just to put out sets. I mean, will there ever just be expansions? Like, I guess you can't really do expansions for something like this. Like,
well,
I mean, you could release a set that's, Battle for Faerun, an expansion for Battle for Faerun that just had 20 new cards in it.
I think that would be really cool, and I think that
or an equipment pack, faction packs.
Like think about Battle of Faerun, Waterdeep, and then or Battle of Faerun, Baldur's Gate, or any of their properties that they have that are Forgotten Realms that. Just a smaller expansion, and that definitely is what's going to need to happen for the superhero sets if they're going to get anywhere close to getting all the superheroes.
Or just even like this, Battle for Faerun Spell Pack. Spell Pack 1.
Or Grimoire.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like more spells. Like, I wish they would do something where it just, release an expansion that was $15-$20 that just came with 10, 15 new cards and enough dice to play those cards. Like, just buy it outright. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I saw something online today that was pretty interesting, and it made total sense. Like, most people's MO for Dice Masters is to buy a starter set, sometimes 2 starter sets, and 1 or 2 gravity feeds.
Yeah.
So let's take 1 gravity feed and a starter set. So that person is paying over $100 to get almost a complete set.
Yeah.
You could not. It's very difficult to potentially get somebody to pay $100 for a board game.
Yeah.
But if you give it to them in little packs that they have to open,
and
they'll pay it.
They will, and it's really cool. That's one thing about this game is it is you say that, and it's true that you can go right out and do that. You're going to end up with a ton of duplicate cards and dice.
Yeah.
It's good if you're buying in, and you can give them to your buddies. I've given
we were trading a lot at the beginning.
Yeah, you've given me some. You gave me a bunch. I gave you some. I've given my other friend Tommy a ton, but also. At our local card shop, you can go down there and you can get a bunch of the common cards for 8 cents, 15 cents, 30 cents, 40 cents, and the dice for a few pennies here and there. So I can go in with $5, get a couple of boosters and 5 or 6 uncommons or commons until I've got them all. Now I have all the commons and uncommons for the superhero sets.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to go after DC collector-wise. I probably hold out for DC and try to get them all, but... It is affordable, Magic I think is about $6 or $7 for a boost.
If you buy a starter, or even buy 2 starters, that's $30.
Yeah,
and then buy boosters here and there, and say you ended up buying 20 boosters, and then just go through the cards, look at them, see the ones you actually want, and then go buy them single. Not everybody has a shop that bought into it as much as the shop here in town.
That's true. That's true.
Where they're selling singles and selling dice. I mean, from when AVX came out, they were doing that on their online store. I mean, everything. So, so overall, Uncanny, what'd you think? Good set? I mean, really fixed a lot of problems?
I think so. I mean, still not a perfect one, but just the availability of so many more characters from the previous set because of that Professor X. And a lot of people didn't like it. A lot of people said it's broken, and they kind of fixed that with the transition rules, and I don't think there's a problem at all.
Yeah.
We still play regular games, Tommy and I, where Professor X isn't in there, and we still do a lot more than it's just knowing that you can get that if you need it to get those heavier characters out faster. It seems like it just made it much more like you're okay. I can play a lot of these cards that were unplayable, and it just made it so much more enjoyable.
Yeah, because I would always, in AVX, I would have, 2 cost characters, and then I would have, a 3, a 4, a 5, and then, 1, 7, and 1, 8, and it always seemed I never got the 6, 7s, and 8s out there. Ever. I just didn't even worry about them because I wasn't going to get them out.
Yeah, it's so hard to buy them unless you intentionally fielded a bunch of people just to get knocked out so you could roll them on the next turn. It was impossible. Yeah,
and then you would do stuff really try, start building your low cost characters to be the Beast card that you get to re-roll when he gets knocked out, and the Ghost Rider card that had something to do with re-rolling. Yeah. And you still couldn't get them out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'd really is that Professor X card, is it in the starter?
No, it's not in the starter, but it is a common. And
is it?
I got several
Okay.
So you got it now.
Okay, cool. So that is Marvel Dice Masters Uncanny X-Men. Also a lot of talk about DC, Yu-Gi-Oh, and D&D Dice Masters. So just a good Dice Masters chit-chat, man.
Yeah.
So we're going to give D&D Dice Masters some play, and we're going to talk about it here in the next couple of weeks. And hopefully we'll see DC here pretty soon. Any updates on the release of DC?
I think it is still May 1st, I want to
say. All the way in May.
I think that's what I last heard. I wouldn't swear to that. I find I'm in a better mental state if I don't keep tight track until it's a lot closer.
For sure.
Especially since I was hoping for DC before D&D.
Yeah.
I don't mind so much because it's going to give me a little more time to save up because, like I said, I don't plan on getting as much of the D&D. But I don't know. There's a couple of typos I've seen already on some of the D&D cards, but the art in general is amazing. They look great.
Yeah, it's really cool.
They look really awesome. The monsters look how you would expect them to look. They used a lot of I know at least one or two of these images I recognize from
books.
Yeah.
Like the Beholder seemed really.
Yeah, and there's some. I haven't seen as many translucent die. I've only gotten one so far. It's the Elf Wizard. She's translucent. I don't know if there's less, and we just haven't gotten any. We opened 5 boosters earlier, but doesn't seem like there's as many translucent. But the dice look really cool and very thematic in terms of the dice. Like some of the dice I was able to look at and that's a Tarrasque's head. It has to be, you know. And then sure it was. Really pumped.
Very cool, man. And I'm looking at the dice right now, and I'm thinking I don't really know what these symbols mean like I do when I look at the Marvel dice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That was one thing, they could go a lot of ways. Like an orc, what are you going to put on there? But Superman, he's going to have an S on his dice, or he's going to, you know what I mean? You could see Superman's dice and never have seen Dice Masters and be like, well, that has something to do with Superman.
Or even the Wolverine claw marks, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But looking through the window, I can see about 15 dice through the window. And the coolest one is the Beholder dice.
Yeah, that one's definitely immediately recognizable.
Yeah,
You're
for sure.
Oh, man, a Beholder.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, though, man. I'm excited to play this. I'm excited to pop this open later and also open some boosters. So,
yeah, man.
Haley, if you're listening, I'm coming home with some boosters.